Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. You got Diane and Elaine here today talking about a topic that is way up on our list of things we deal with families all the time, right?
Yeah, no, actually I got like 3 questions on this in 1 week. And I was like, okay, if we don't already have a podcast episode on this, we absolutely need a podcast episode on this. And it's been a busy month where, like, when this is going live, it's the middle of July in 2023. And we've been heads down into ADHD Parents Palooza land. And I think it's going live right after.
Well, I was going to say, let me say it differently. Yeah. We're recording this mid-July, but it's going live July 26th, right before Palooza, because we've been doing some of the Palooza pre-recordings. So if you haven't signed up for this summer's ADHD Parents Palooza, join us, because amazing conversations. We can attest to that because we've already had some of them. And
if it's a year from now and you're listening to this episode, go find the ADHD Parent Palooza wherever we are in the world right now.
Right. It's such a great event we do every summer. So you can go to, it'll be in the show notes. We'll give you a direct link in the show notes, or Diane, they can go to, what did you say?
ADHDpalooza.com and click on the parents link at the top of the page.
Yeah. So join us for Palooza this summer and every summer. It's an amazing event. So
what are we talking about? We haven't even told them. We told them that
we're talking about drama, right?
Right. We're going to talk about the set the stage, right? So parents come to us all the time and say, my spouse and my kid are always fighting, or my kid and their sibling are always fighting, or
I'm always fighting with my kid and it's making my spouse crazy.
Right. So there's some dynamic, and fighting isn't always like active fighting, but it's like this sort of, there's a dynamic conflict between two people. And then there's a third person that's involved or impacted or something else. And oftentimes, I'm going to stereotype here. It's like one parent is like, okay, so my kid and my spouse have got to stop fighting. It's making me crazy and I've got to do something about it. And they've been trying to do something about it, and they've been trying to navigate and work through it. And it's not working successfully. And there's a reason for that.
And the other thing that happens in that dynamic is oftentimes you'll have one parent interacting one way and another parent trying to compensate for that. So maybe I've got the strict parent, and then you've got the more permissive parent, and the more permissive parent is trying to go easy because you've got the strict counterbalance. So sometimes it's not my natural tendency, but I'm reacting or responding to the other dynamic.
And that, I think that you use both words there, reacting versus responding. A lot of times it's hard for us to be in the midst of conflict. It's like we're sitting there and there may be active arguing and things like that. And it's hard not to do something, because for many of us, active conflict dysregulates us. And so then we're either fighting or flighting. We're either trying to jump in and fix it, or we're trying to run away and get out of there, and we can't because we're co-parenting or whatever it is. But there's the biology and the natural tendencies of how we respond in conflict. And then there's the, what do we do when it's really not us and our conflict?
Right. So bottom line is, how do we be in relationship with other people being in relationship with each other without imposing ourselves in the middle of it, right? Or feeling like we need to fix it or control it or be the peacemaker. And that's not to say that there's no role for peacemakers in family dynamics. But, I think you and I talked about this a lot. Part of our job as parents is to support our kids in being in relationship with their other parent or parents. And whether we're still in co-parenting actively, whether we're still, partnered or not, it doesn't even matter. The point is that our job is to be in relationship with our kids and then to support them in their relationships in their lives. And sometimes that means helping them learn to be in relationship with another parent who it may be difficult for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and so the model that I introduce is what is called the drama triangle. Right. And so it comes from it's the Karpman drama triangle is actually what it is. But what I think about is that we've got a relationship. Let's just use the example we were talking about earlier, where a co-parent and a kid are in conflict with one another. Right. And so I have a relationship with my co-parent. And I have a relationship with my kid, and the two of them have a relationship with each other, and it creates a triangle if we close the triangle, right? So if I'm just staying over here trying to be in relationship with my kid and help them navigate life, including life with a co-parent that they're having a hard time with, that's this side of the triangle. If I'm over here helping my co-parent navigate in relationship with their child without trying to get in the middle of it, but just, okay, you're having a hard time, let me be here with you, right? The triangle is
you're in a V.
Oh, and I'm in a V, and it's good. The minute it closes, and I think about like the third rail on the subway, right? It's just sort of you don't close the triangle, because Karpman's model is when the triangle is closed, someone becomes the villain, someone becomes the victim, and someone becomes the rescuer. And often that'll shift in the middle of the triangle, but I'm over here trying to get them to make peace with each other. I mean, it's the same thing when your kids are fighting. It's like, I'm over here trying to get them to like each other or try to get them to not fight. Instead of being in relationship with each of them independently, I've suddenly closed off the triangle, and that's where the drama happens.
Well, there's where some of the drama happened. The escalation happened. I'm reminded of a book I read 1,000 years ago called The Dance of Anger. That was very similar. It was this notion that there is a triangle. And so it's very much what you're talking about. And I think what we want to talk about here today is how do we prevent triangulation and stay in relationship and stay in support of both of these people we love without creating escalated drama that we don't really need. Fair?
Well, and I think that one of the core pieces of that is that it's what is your job? What is your job when other humans are in conflict? Whether it's your kid or whether it's your co-parent or it's your friends or whatever, what is your job and what is not your job? And obviously there are safety issues. And if your kids are fighting, you might put yourself physically in between your kids to see if what you can do to divide that. And what I would say is that you want to do that from a place of neutrality rather than a place of accusation. And I remember this really distinctly. My kids are about 19 months apart. If they're listening, I'm going to promise not to tell on either one of you. But what I would always do is I would be like, you guys are fighting, not you're picking on your sister, not you're doing this to your brother. I mean, it was never, I would try really hard not to take sides, but just to observe that there was fighting and arguing going on. And that my goal was to stop the fighting and the arguing without taking sides and getting in the middle between them, because I needed to be able to support them both in the midst of that conflict. So even if you do need to insert yourself, you want to do it from a place of neutrality rather than from a place of, okay, I'm going to help I'm going to get my husband to behave better so that they stop fighting with my son or whatever. It's this sort of thing. Right.
Well, and I think let's talk about neutrality, because I think when we've got complex kids, very often it feels like the world is against them. And so sometimes we become rescuers, saviors, advocates, right? But sometimes advocating, we kind of go overboard with it because we're kind of balancing the rest of the world. And so we don't stay neutral because it doesn't feel fair. We're actually feeling like it's not fair what you're doing to this person.
Well, and I guess that there's a distinction between neutrality. I think about the tool that I like to call people to the most in this situation is compassion, right? It's this sort of, I can have compassion in both sides of the triangle, right? It's just sort of, I can have, if these two people are fighting with each other, I can say, wow, I can tell you're really angry with your sister. And it makes sense that you would be angry with your sister because this is the way you're seeing the situation. Wow, I can tell you're really angry with your brother. And it makes perfect sense that you would be angry with your brother because this is how you see the situation, right? So I can be with them independently and say, I get it. I see you. I see your side of this. And I love and support you as a human.
Yeah.
And not you're right and she's wrong, right? And that's the distinction. That's the neutrality is.
And I guess what I'm calling, Diane, is sometimes as parents, and I know I've been in this role, I have to remind myself to go neutral because I do have a tendency to defend the underdog and like it feels like you're being a bully and that's not fair. And like, I do have that and I know I'm not alone. I think what would be fun, if you're open to it, is you and I both said we've coached around this multiple times just this week. Yeah. So let's pull 2 or 3 examples and just talk through. I've got one in mind. Do you want to start?
No, go ahead. You do it.
Okay. A couple with one child, single child, 19. Mom has been doing a lot of work in the coach approach. Dad is not quite as caught up in it, but is catching up. And dad is really, really, really well intended. But there's a disparity. Kids come home from college for the summer, and there's some other deeper issues of, what happens when 19-year-old kids go off to college and they come home woke and aware of the world and blaming their parents for everything. And so one parent mom is feeling really trying to be present to this kid and to support her, meet her where she is. And the dad is feeling hurt and offended and judged and having a harder time because he's kind of feeling odd man out, right? Okay. And so the conversation, the coaching was really around meeting each of them where they are, which is what you were talking about earlier.
The sides of the triangle.
Two sides of the triangle. And being able to support the spouse in feeling hurt and feeling left out and feeling like it's not fair what this kid's accusing him of, right? Because he's only been trying to love and be an intentionally great dad. And right now he's got a 19-year-old kid who's, carrying a flag and a banner and, is fighting against all of the evils of the world. And, the dad kind of represents that to this kid, while at the same time being able to meet the kid and say, I want to support you in what you're doing. And I want to invite you to do it respectfully because this person loves you. Right. So it's to support each of them where they are without voting and saying, yes, it's okay or not, it's not, but to be able to say, to continue to invite the respectful acknowledgement of each other. Now, again, we're talking about an older kid here. I'm not talking about a 9-year-old. What comes up?
Well, I think that even the judgment, your heart, the heart in that is right. Mom wants the kid to be invited to more respect. Even that could be interpreted as mom's getting in the middle, right? And then all of a sudden, villain victim. Okay, I'm the bad guy because I'm not being respectful to dad. Mom's taking sides with dad, right? I'm highlighting that even something that simple, and so we've got to be really cautious in how the person's going to see our language, right? We want to be supportive. And if they're going to hear that as you're taking sides versus, and so, yes. And the other piece of this is when somebody's dysregulated. I mean, we're talking about active conflict. So they may not see your heart in it. Even if you're, well-meaning, they may just be like, oh, you're taking sides, you're with them. Sorry, you're in the bad camp. And all of a sudden the drama triangle's closed.
Yeah. So that's the risk of the thing that could happen that could close the triangle. In this case, that's not what's happening, right? What's happening is the mom is actually doing a pretty damn good job of staying out of it and of supporting each of them and building the relationship with the child so that they can have those conversations about, how are you showing up and is this how you want to show up? And still being supportive in the process. But again, language matters a lot.
Language matters. And the tool that's coming up that we teach all the time is ACE. Mm-hmm. So you start with acknowledging compassion. So you're just acknowledging what's going on for them for a long time. And there's a pause and you're giving them space to clear and regulate and do whatever you want. And then it's an E, and often for me, it's explore, which is this sort of, is what do you want to do about it? I can tell you're really upset about this. What do you want to do about it? Is there something I can support you with around this? You should just tell dad to.
It's not going to work.
Unfortunately, I can't do that. And
right?
I can help you figure out how you want to handle the situation. If you want to handle it differently, I can invite you. I can give some ideas of what you might do differently, but I can't do it because it's not
your relationship.
This is your relationship, right?
Right. And that's the key is that we are able to say to our kids, I get that right now you might be having a hard time in your relationship with your ex, dad, sibling, teacher, whatever. And I get that that's really hard. There's that acknowledgement with compassion you were talking about, part of ACE. And, when if you feel like there's something you want to do about it, if you'd like to problem solve around it, let me know. I'm happy to support you in that. But notice how all of that language, that ACE that Diane's bringing in, that it's all putting it over there, keeping it on their relationship with this other person and not bringing yourself into, well, what are we going to do about it? Am I right? It's not about me.
Well, and it may be scaffolding, because I'm thinking about parents of young kids, because you brought in the whole idea with a teacher, right? So I'm imagining a kid who's having a hard time with a teacher, and it may be intimidating to a kid to actually have to be the one who talks to the teacher. And so there are ways for you to dance into that. And it might be, would you like me to go with you and stand with you while you talk to the teacher? Would you like
me to help you write
a letter,
right?
The email? Would you like me to, it's this sort of, would you like me to sit and introduce the conversation? Would you, it's this sort of, you're doing everything other than putting yourself in the middle of it.
Because this is about their ownership. And about them seeing it as their responsibility, their relationship, and their opportunity to problem solve or not as they choose, right?
And you may end up in, would you like me to advocate for you? And there may be places that happens. And
but that's still their ownership.
Their ownership of it. And I think that that's the piece of it. You want to be really careful that you're trying to be objective and trying not to close the triangle and wanting to support and help your kid when they're dealing with potentially another adult that's hard for them to deal with.
Yeah. All right. You got another example?
No, I was just going to go back to the siblings, because actually the one that I coached this week was the same sort of thing, where it was one parent and a kid. And it's just sort of,
I've got another with a younger kid, if you want to use that. And there's a sibling involved.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, conflict of family with two young kids under the age of 11, two parents, and an upset in the summer where a kid didn't make it through camp, right? Which we know happens in this community sometimes. And so you've got a really upset, dysregulated kid and a neurotypical sibling trying to kind of get in there and protect the kid. So now the sibling is the one that's saying, but he's so upset. He's so right. And you've got one parent who's kind of handling it grounded and another parent who's really worried. And so there's a dysregulation there. And so
I think so job number one, right? So everybody's dysregulated. Job number one is, find a way to be the grown up. Right?
Two dysregulated and two not. In this scenario.
Well, and I think that that's the piece of it, is make self-check, right? It's just, I was just on with a couple and it was like, okay, wait, a huge part of this is self-management. So I don't end up falling in the cavern with whoever's dysregulated.
Right.
So it's this sort of, okay, so then my job is, how do I support each of the players in this, create a line to each of the players. So it's not quite a triangle because there's four of them. Right. And you want to figure out how to get the other person out of the triangle, because if they're in the middle of the triangle, it's a sort of, I know you're here to help your sibling. Can we talk about how best to support your sibling instead of you trying to get in the middle and defend them or be or take the action or that sort of stuff? Let's figure out what our role is in it, kind of thing.
Right.
But again, it's a sort of, you want to focus on this path. How can I help you?
One path.
How can I help you?
Visually, those of you listening, one path and then the next path and then the next path, right? You're like the spoke in the wheel to all these different
Exactly. And so it's not quite a triangle. It's like I don't even know what shape it would be. Whatever shape it is. But it's really about being in relationship with each of them as individuals and avoiding becoming the thing that tries to patch the relationship. Again, it's a sort of, you don't want anybody to become the villain, the victim, or the rescuer. It's not ultimately underneath this, Elaine, I don't think we've said this yet. Part of what we're trying to do is to help our kids to figure out how to be in healthy, effective relationships when there's conflict. We don't want it's not just about fixing the fight that's going on right now. It's about, we're going to experience conflict all our lives.
Right.
And you're not going to, we know we don't want to be in the business of fixing conflict for our kids all our lives. And we want to help our kids to develop conflict management skills. And so if we focus on that, rather than on it's the difference between ending the fight and figuring out how to manage conflict. Right.
And you know what? I love this part of this conversation, because conflict management is something that a lot of adults get into trouble with at work, in family dynamics, in all kinds of friendships and relationship issues. If we have that tendency to avoid conflict, then it interferes with our ability to be in relationship, because conflicts happen in almost every relationship on some level.
And we did 2 other episodes around conflict and the underlying causes of conflict. So let's make sure we link to those in the show notes, and go back and listen to those if you haven't listened to them, or listen to them again if you have. But it's this sort of, all of this is interconnection around conflict.
Yeah. All right. So are there any other strategies you tend to use when you're coaching around this that you think would be useful? You've brought up ACE. I would say usually I would often use the design. That was where I kind of left today. Is like, what do you want to design? And I'll put a link to Relationships by Design. I know we've got a podcast on that. And that design is just, how do you ask for something in a way that diffuses defensiveness and doesn't make people get reactive? Well,
and the other tool is just the self-management. It's just sort of, it's really hard not to go. It's really hard, especially if you've got an adult in your family who's kind of being a bully, which often happens. Yeah, I do a lot of coaching with individuals who are divorced, right? And it's this sort of, they come home from dads or from moms, and they've been, really emotionally beat up, and they're having a hard time. And it's hard not to go in and want to go into mama bear or papa bear rescuer mode. And ultimately our kids have to figure out how to be in relationship with that other human, unless they're not safe. And I want to say that if they're not safe, then there's a whole other conversation here. And part of this is our definitions of safe are often different. Yeah.
Well, and what's coming up as you're saying that is that often it's about, feeling like a kid's being on some level bullied, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like you've got another parent who is irresponsible, who's not following through on agreements, who's not holding accountability, who's being inconsistent with medication or routines, or making sure the kid gets sleep. I mean, there are all kinds of other things that. Well,
and sometimes even our kids. I mean, so many of our kids are so savvy. It's like, right. Mom's being a hypocrite because she says I have to do this, but she never does it. Right. It's a sort of, there's all of that sort of stuff that goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so again, as we wrap this conversation up, the bottom line here is our job as parents is to support our kids on their journey of learning to manage themselves. And part of learning to manage themselves is learning to be in relationships.
Even when they're hard.
Relationships, even when they're hard, even when there's conflict. Sometimes, especially when there is that dance between conflict and love, because, part of what we're talking about in family dynamics is kids want to love and be in relationship with their parents and their siblings. That's like, they really want it. And
even if they don't say
it, then that kind of adds this other layer of, well, maybe I'm screwing it up, or maybe I just don't know how to do it, or maybe I'm not lovable.
Yeah.
So helping them learn to be in difficult relationships is actually part of helping them realize that they are lovable and that they have the capacity to establish relationships even when they're hard.
Well, and the thing I would leave us with is the word trust, because it's really hard to imagine it. And I was talking to mom the other day, and it's like, she's so hungry that her kids get along. She has a great relationship with one of her siblings as an adult, and she loves them so much, and they have such a great time together. And she's terrified that these kids are going to end up on their own, and they're going to hate each other the rest of their lives, and they aren't going to have a relationship. And so trust your kids' journey, trust your kids' relationships, and it's hard to look at at difficult relationships and to say, okay, so maybe this relationship will figure itself out at some point. Or maybe this is what this kid really needs, is to be in a difficult relationship so that they can experience a different kind of relationship later in their lives, right? So that word trust is so hard, but find something to lean into. There's a bigger picture, something going on here that you might be able to hang on to that might make it easier for you, because sometimes it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, and what that brought up is this whole other thing. Maybe it's another episode about not catastrophizing and attachment to, and not being attached to the outcome, being present to where they are in the relationship now, and not so fearing forward where they're going to be 6 months, 6 years, whatever from now, that you're not able to be present to where you are now. And
yeah. Kids fight all the time.
In it now, and knowing that drama is part of family life, but just because there's drama doesn't mean we have to freak out about it.
Yeah.
Right. We get to just be present to it and go, isn't that interesting that got them so triggered? And take it from there. All right. Anything else you want to add?
No, this is great. I love this conversation.
Always and forever. I love all conversations with you, even when there's conflict. And just so you know, sometimes there's conflict.
With us? Never. All right. Thanks all for listening to us. Thanks for everything you're doing for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, you make a difference.
And remember, Palooza's coming up next week. Join us. See you there.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/Sanity School.